Hey, hi, hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess, and I know this is late, but I am finally doing my wrap up for Nonfiction November. My TBR for Nonfiction November was 5 books. I successfully finished 3 of them, and they were Empire of Pain by Patrick Radden Keefe, which is The Secret History of the Sackler Dynasty, Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington, which is the dark history of medical experimentation on Black Americans from colonial times to the present, and A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. So these were 3 of the 5, like I said, and they were all amazing. I used a lot of tabs while reading these books, and I got to talk about 2 of them with 2 different people. So with Empire of Pain, well, 2 people. Empire of Pain, I was on the TBR Lowdown podcast that's hosted by Alyssa and Naomi, which will be listed down below. And I can also have their bookstagrams linked as well. We all read this and talked about it. We had a lot of feelings. We didn't even get through everything, but this was excellent. And I can't wait to read the book that he has coming out next year. And also I ordered one of his other books that he has written before called Say Nothing, but this was incredible. This one is about the Sackler family. They're the family responsible for OxyContin. And I didn't know much about the drug or the family before. I had heard the Sackler name, but I didn't link it to anything in the pharmaceutical world because they made it a point to keep their names separate. So the family owned the company, I think still owns the company, Purdue Pharma, which I've also heard of, but again, never together. I never linked them together. So this traces the history of the family from back in the day, from like the first, or like the parents of the 3 brothers who really started the company to the present. And this is really timely because there were recent things. This is, like up to like last year, I think, if not the beginning of this year, things that happened with the Sackler family and like major lawsuits about OxyContin. So essentially the brothers, there were like 3 brothers, Arthur, Raymond, and Mortimer. And Arthur worked many jobs. He was hustling at a young age to make ends meet, to help put his brothers through college. And he had, a great work ethic, a great mind, vision. And it said what he put it towards. So he really got into marketing and basically started heavy marketing for pharmaceuticals. I think one of his first big ones was Valium, and he took all of those strategies and things he learned to when his family was creating, basically they were looking for a replacement to morphine, and when they created OxyContin, they had something before that called MS-Contin, and then they wanted something that even better. That was going to be the drug everyone wanted, the end and be all drug of drugs for pain, because they were convinced there was a pain epidemic and nobody was solving that. And so they created OxyContin. And I am obviously like simplifying this to the max because he definitely goes into the history of everything, like from the very start into how they got to creating OxyContin, but I'm just giving you the simplest thing. And then he used those skills that he had developed to market the thing. So this shows you just how interconnected all of these different groups are that you don't think should be. So he, a medical doctor, and his brothers, other people, but then they have doctors that they know and work with, are friends with, who can, give them quotes or testimonials that this drug is so great. Then they had people in the FDA that they either knew or basically like whittled down and like had in their pocket to approve things for them. And so they would put out marketing material, sometimes with real doctors, like testimonials, and sometimes making up stuff from doctors and basically got all this hype around this drug that it was so good. It lasted 12 hours. It could take care of all your pains from like back pain to cancer pain, and it's not addictive. Like that was their big thing. You cannot get addicted to this. It lasts way longer than something else. It's not as potent as morphine, when it was more potent than morphine, and it was addictive, but they squashed all of that information. And it's just a really great chronicle through all of the shady things and all of the dealings this family has done, and the way what they did also has kind of shaped and influenced the way pharmaceuticals are now, and still the ongoing effect of OxyContin and how many people became addicted to it, and this new opioid crisis that we're going through. And then at the, I don't want to say anything, but I mean, if you've been keeping up with the news, the ending of this made me so mad. But then there was something recently in the news that made me happy and gave me a sliver of hope. So I know I don't feel like I made any kind of coherent sense, but I thought this was excellent. I listened to the audiobook along with the physical, and like I said, I have so many tabs, so it's so hard not to tab and highlight the whole book. So many of my notes in the margin are like, what the fuck? I can't believe this. This just shows you greed and how America always puts profit over people, and the problem we have in America with when we prosecute corporations, because corporations are run by people, but often when there's a lawsuit, it's against the corporation, and it allows the people behind the corporation to get away with a lot of things, even if the corporation is fined or penalized. And I think that's a huge issue, along with our pharmaceutical industry and the advertisement around pharmaceuticals. Like, this shows so many problems within the American system in this one book, and I highly recommend everyone read it, but just be prepared to be pissed off. But this was excellent. And I'll have that podcast episode listed down below. And so before I read that one though, I did read A Mind Spread Out on the Ground by Alicia Elliott. I read this one really quickly. So this is an essay collection. Alicia Elliott is an Indigenous author. And so at first I thought this was mostly written about Canada, but she spent part of her life in the United States, in part in Canada. So she talks about both, and there are a lot of things that are very similar about her experience as an Indigenous person in both of these parts of North America. And the essays touch on depression and, you know, questioning identity, what it's like being part white, part Indigenous, her different experiences growing up in America, in Canada, the different things that Indigenous people go through, but then also relating that a lot to, you know, a lot things that Black and brown people go through in the States and in Canada. And there were just some really great moments in here that I felt really relatable. There was a quote earlier on in the book that I literally wrote actual chills beside, and she's talking about instances of suicide, and she says, we know our cultures have meaning and worth, that culture lives and breathes inside our languages. The US and Canada knew that too, which is why they fought so hard to make us forget them. Wow. So of course she also touches on like residential schools briefly, and it is just, it's a really quick and easy read. Not like some of it's not heartbreaking, but I again listened to the audio along with this, but I think the different essays, because she talks about being a parent and then talks about her experience as a child and how other children looked at her and like questions she had with being, you know, part white, part Indigenous, and like not looking Indigenous enough, but not looking white enough. And I can't relate to that, but I still can understand as a child those questions, especially with kids, because, you know, kids just be saying the damnedest things and be so out of pocket. When I was researching earlier this year about residential schools, and when I had just learned that they existed in the United States, I had heard of this one school, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. So she does talk about one of those that was in America as well. So I definitely would look into content warnings for this one, because I mean, she does go through some really heavy topics. She talks about when she was younger and talking about food, and there's a part that I highlighted and I wrote a question. So she said that I, who survived on peanut butter and food bank cereal during my formative years, who never had the good sense to develop a more expensive palate once I left home, have no business in this neighborhood. So I was wondering, because I wrote, is this a common thing for people who grew up, you know, poor or lower class? Because I also, I mean, we only ate certain things, and I'm a very picky eater now, so I wonder if that affected a lot of people, but I thought that was just interesting. And she talks about, you know, why people in certain classes have to eat certain food, and the reason why junk foods are cheaper in the United States, and talks about the poverty rates and why they're higher amongst, you know, ethnic groups instead of white people, and really just talks about all of the differences. And she just touches on so many different ways that people, Indigenous people and other ethnic minorities, are just have the cards stacked against them, essentially, because both the US and the both the US and Canada have, you know, looked down on them for so long and considered them less than for so long, and the way that they try to make these small, or try to give these small acknowledgements of past harm that they've committed, but not really, like they're not acknowledging it enough, not taking enough responsibility, and not doing enough to try, and you can never make up for it, right? But not doing enough to try to level the playing field, or, you know, make everyone have this like equitable chance in life like they should, because the generational trauma that comes with being someone who had family members who went to residential schools. And she talks about like alcoholism, and of course like depression, suicide, suicidal ideation, just all of these things that come with generational trauma, which also can relate to Black people in America, the history of slavery. And so there were, while this is about her and her story as being an Indigenous person who lived in both Canada and America, I still, as a Black American, related a lot to a lot of the things that she said. And I would love to go back through this and reread it and like discuss it with somebody, because it's short, but it's very poignant. And finally, the probably hardest one to get through was medical apartheid. So I also discussed this with a friend that I know through Instagram. Her name is Heidi, and she has her PhD in like research, something in research. She lives in the UK, and we did a discussion on this and talking about how it applies to her work, because her thing is kind of trying to make research trials and things more diverse but inequitable and stuff like that. And so we had a really good discussion about this that I will be putting up later this week. I hope y'all will check out. The medical apartheid, like I said, is the history from colonial times to the present of medical experimentation on Black bodies. So it starts back in slavery time and then to the present, this was published in 2006. So it's been a little while, but still very relevant because of, you know, stories that we're still hearing, things that have preserved or persevered from colonial times, like people thinking that Black people have tougher skin or don't feel pain as much. We're still hearing about now. The higher maternal death rates we're still hearing about now. So this was super hard to read in moments. It took me longer to get through because it was just intense, learning about obviously how people were valued or devalued during slave times. You know, especially if someone was ill and really not, it rarely was worth the money to like send them to a doctor, or how some doctors had slaves and they used them basically for experiments, so they were given to doctors for experiments, how these stereotypes were created and basically out of nowhere, and all of the different like hoops they had to jump through to try to justify all of the things that they did to Black people. Like they used their Bible for some things, like using certain parts and twisting it to support their notion of this. And of course there's the Black people were hypersexualized, and we had more diseases, and we had these nasty bigger body parts, and we were put on display at zoos, and we were used for experimentation until they perfected a procedure. But then once that procedure was perfected on the Black body, but now it's good enough, so now they can do it correctly on the white body. The way that Black people couldn't even find freedom and peace after in death, because they would hire Black men to rob graves so that they would have bodies to practice on for dissection. And cadavers, real human cadavers, are very important to dissection and medical school training and stuff like that, but they obtain them illegally. There was a story in here about one of the victims from the 1963 Birmingham church bombing, and how her family went back years later to move her grave, and there was no body in the coffin. It had been stolen. There's stories about places where they were maybe doing like construction and would find hundreds of thousands of bones, of human bones, where they were just the bodies that they practice on, and they just, you know, threw in the basement like they were garbage. So many people robbed of that, like, you know, eternal peace, at least their bodies, because they were viewed less than. She talks about the forced hysterectomies of a lot of Black women because, of course, you know, they were looked down on, like they shouldn't procreate, they shouldn't be having more children. All of there's, oh my God, there's so much, all of the different experiments. And she does touch on how it's very often in the Black community, one of the main things that people talk about is the Tuskegee experiment, which did happen and was really terrible. And I thought that was really relevant, especially now with COVID and the vaccine, because I've heard people talk about they're having a mistrust in the medical establishment, which makes sense because of Tuskegee, but a lot of people have it wrong, and they think that the government gave those Black men syphilis when it really was that they wanted to study the progression of syphilis. And so they found this group of Black men in, I think it was Alabama, and around 600 of them, and who already had syphilis. And so they told them that they were treating them, like giving them medicine to treat what they had. I don't even think all of the men actually even knew it was syphilis. Some of them thought they just had bad blood, but they weren't giving them treatment. They weren't giving them medicine. They were just watching how the disease progressed and what it damaged, what it did, how long it took them to die. And when they finished dying, or when they finally died, they of course would, you know, take their body and dissect it and see exactly what it hurt, because syphilis was thought to be predominantly a Black disease, of course. And so there are so many instances of it. She talks about radiation trials and plutonium trials and just all of these things, all these experiments that were done to Black people against their will or against their knowledge. She also talks a lot about informed consent for medical trials, because there is a chapter about the experiments they did on prisoners, and not just Black prisoners, also white prisoners, and they destroyed a lot of the evidence, so I don't know if anyone's really ever been held accountable. But some of their excuses were, well, we told them what we were doing. But she talks about how informed consent is more than just saying, here's what this is. Everyone's not going to understand exactly what you're doing. You know, a science experiment to the lay person, they may understand. There's people with levels of intelligence or levels of education, and explaining, especially if it's a trial and it's ongoing and things change, you need to keep updating them and making sure they understand every bit of it before they consent to it. So, this is a lot. It's very tough. But I think it's so important. Like, I feel like this needs to be required reading for at least every person that's going into any kind of medical field, because if you don't know the history of why a lot of Black Americans are so hesitant to seek treatment or to believe in vaccines or trust medical establishment or the government in general with things relating to their body, then how are you going to have those proper conversations or know how to approach them in these situations, like now with COVID vaccines and going out into communities? Do people know this history? Do they know enough of it, like outside of Tuskegee, to know why so many people are fearful? And yeah, it's hard to read. It's a lot, but I think it's just super important because, again, this is who America was and is. They have always, from the start of this country, been white people who have taken advantage of people of a different color or ethnicity group and killed them and used them and subjugated them, always. And so history, it's so funny. You always hear about, like, it's so important to study history, so we're doomed to repeat it, or people questioning, like, oh, this isn't the America I know. And it is, though. All three of these books show you who America has been and still is. All of these have different perspectives, but show you exactly what America is as a country. They care about white people first and profits. Those are the top things, profits and white people in America. And everybody else under that, you know, there's rankings. But I think all of these books are so important, and I would highly recommend them to anyone, because they're just going to give you, they're very different books, but they're going to give you so much to like just fill in the picture of like, you know, America sucks, but here's some more evidence where you can be like, people are like, America's the best country, or like, make America great again. When was it great? When was it great? But colonial times. We're talking about when indigenous lands were taken. We're talking about starting back, and then, you know, the Great Depression to now with drug. Like, when was it great? When was it great? Please tell me. No, it has never been great. The idea is great, but it has never been there for anybody outside of certain select groups. And so I don't know if I did a good job at all of talking about these. I just skimmed the surface. There's so much in these books. I really hope everyone eventually picks these up. They were so, it's hard to say so good because all of them made me upset and mad and sad, but they are excellent. And I just cannot encourage you enough to read these, even if you're outside of America. If you want a better picture of America, you should read these also. Like, these are helpful to anyone. And I just, I don't know. I feel like while there has been progress, because obviously a lot of this stuff this was back before we had like ethics boards and stuff like that, there's still mistreatment of the Black body. There's still higher maternal death rates in America, especially with Black women. There's still providers that aren't listening to Black people when they tell them about their pain. I'm gonna be angry if I keep talking about these. Anyway, read all of these, they'll be linked down below. So good. If you read anything in November for Nonfiction November, please let me know down below. You know, I always want to add more nonfiction to my list. This has been a really great year of nonfiction for me. I'm looking forward to reading even more next year, and I feel really upset now after talking about these books. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. Give this video a thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you like reading nonfiction or interested in reading more nonfiction, but maybe you don't know where to start. I do have a nonfiction book club. It's always linked down below. It's called bookcommunitea. For January, we are reading Mediocre. So if you want to join us, we have a Discord where people discuss the book while they're reading it. And then in February, we'll have a live show discussing thoughts. So definitely check that out if you're interested. But anyway, I hope you're having a wonderful holiday season. Stay blessed, hydrate, moisturize, and sunscreen, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.